I stepped out of the gleaming black sedan, my heavy shoes crunching onto the gravel of the Hartman Estate's front courtyard. The Friday afternoon air carried the crisp chill of autumn, with golden leaves drifting lazily to the ground, as if they too were trying to escape something nameless. I am Damien Hartman, 26 years old, the eldest son of the Hartman family, just back from a grueling meeting at the office. In my hand was an old leather briefcase stuffed with documents I had spent hours perfecting, hoping that one day my father might finally notice. Deep down, though, I knew it was just wishful thinking. The massive front door of the mansion suddenly swung open with a creak of hinges like a warning. My father, Franklin Hartman, 62, chairman of Hartman Global Holdings, an empire worth billions of dollars, strode out as though carried by a gust of wind. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his silver hair impeccably combed, and in his hand he held a thin off-white envelope. His eyes swept over me without pausing for even a second. No nod, no greeting, no flicker of expression on that stern face. He walked past me as if I were an invisible ghost, an insignificant obstacle in his path. I stood there, forcing a stiff smile at my own reflection in the car window, trying to appear calm. But inside, my father's habitual indifference still cut like a small razor-sharp knife, stabbing my heart over and over again, just as it had throughout my entire childhood. From the time I was a child, I had grown used to this. Cold glances, curt commands, and long silences that built walls of stone. "Your father is very busy," my mother used to say before she vanished from my life. But now, at 26, I was no longer that naive little boy. Each time this happened, the pain was no longer childish fear. It was a deep, quiet sadness mixed with curiosity and anger. Why was he like this? Why was I, his own flesh and blood son, always pushed to the sidelines? My father left the house alone, no bodyguards, no driver, no one accompanying him. He opened the door to his mysterious black Rolls-Royce Phantom himself, slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The motor purred softly, like a wild beast released from its cage. He drove away, gliding through the towering iron gates of the estate, as if no one in the world was important enough to ride with him. I knew exactly where he was going: the bank. A journey he had made without fail for the past 14 years, every single Friday at precisely 3 p.m., never a minute late. I could picture it clearly. He would drive through the city's crowded streets, stop in front of the towering glass building of the central bank, walk in like a king, and do something with that envelope. Transfer money? Withdraw money? Something else? No one knew, and no one dared ask. In the Hartman family, this habit was forbidden territory. No employee, no relative ever spoke of it. Even at the company, Friday afternoons were an unspoken no-go zone. No one scheduled meetings, no one looked for him, no one called. I remember once when I was still an intern at Hartman Global Holdings, accidentally suggesting an urgent meeting on a Friday afternoon. My father's secretary looked at me as if I had committed a mortal sin, her face turning pale as she whispered, "Never do that again, Damien. The boss, he does not like to be disturbed on Friday afternoons." A few years ago, when I was 22, freshly graduated from university and returning home hoping for my father's recognition, I was sitting in the living room watching the clock strike 3 p.m. as he left as usual. Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned to the old butler who had served the family since my grandfather's time. "Do you know where my father goes?" I asked casually, as if it were just small talk. The butler froze mid-motion while polishing the silver, his face draining of color as though he'd seen a ghost. The bank," he stammered, voice trembling. Then he immediately shut his mouth, turned away, and busied himself with his work. I saw his hands shaking, and the air in the room suddenly grew heavier. From that day on, I realized there was something far more unusual than my father's rigid routines. A secret guarded by coldness and power. For 14 years, whether it poured rain or snow blanketed the ground, turning the front courtyard into a sea of white, my father never missed his Friday trip to the bank. I remember one time, years ago, when he was in the middle of a critical meeting at the company. A multi-billion-dollar deal with investors from around the world. The conference room was so tense you could hear a pin drop, sweat beading on everyone's foreheads. The clock struck 2:55 p.m. on a Friday. My father suddenly stood up, took the thin envelope from his drawer, and announced curtly, "The meeting ends here." No explanation, no apology. He walked out, drove himself away, and left the entire room stunned. I was there, sitting at the far end of the table like a nameless assistant, embarrassed on his behalf. Yet at the same time, curiosity burned even hotter. What could possibly be so important that he would sacrifice everything for it? That image, the black car gliding through the iron gates and disappearing behind the dense row of ancient trees, had become the familiar ritual of every Friday. A ritual so cold that it served as a constant reminder. In this house, there were truths no one was ever allowed to touch. One gray weekend morning, with a light drizzle falling outside the windows and making the atmosphere inside the Hartman mansion even heavier, I was sitting at the breakfast table nibbling on a piece of dry toast when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered anyway, and the voice on the other end, my father's secretary at the company, was trembling as if she were holding back tears. "Mr. Damien, Mr. Franklin, he's had a stroke. The doctors are trying to save him, but it looks really bad." I froze. The piece of toast slipped from my fingers and fell to the floor. A stroke? My father, the iron-willed man who controlled everything, how could he have a stroke? I sat there, my chest hollow, throat tight as if someone were squeezing it. No matter how cold he had always been, no matter that he had never once hugged me or offered a single word of praise, he was still my father, the man who had given me life, even if he never showed it with love. After a few seconds of stunned silence, I forced myself to move. I grabbed a coat, snatched my car keys, and bolted out of the house. My tires screeched on the wet pavement as I raced to the hospital where he was being treated. But all hope shattered the moment I ran into the emergency room corridor. The doctor stepped out, removed his mask, and looked down gravely. My father had not survived. A massive cerebral stroke. Sudden, violent, and too late to save. The news spread like wildfire. Press, media, acquaintances, everyone descended at once. Yet inside the Hartman estate, the mood wasn't grief. It was a terrifying silence. Melanie, my stepmother, swiftly took control. She organized a lavish funeral that felt more like a gala than a farewell. Luxury cars lined up outside the gates, flowers were piled high, and an orchestra played mournful symphonies. Everything was under her iron grip. Melanie Hartman, arrogant, calculating, with golden hair always pinned up high and expensive black dresses clinging to her figure, stood at the center beside my father's coffin, her face a mask of cold solemnity, eyes sharp as blades. It was as if she were declaring to the world that she was now the new mistress of the Hartman dynasty. I walked into the funeral parlor in a heavy black suit, trying to keep my composure. But when Melanie looked me up and down, open contempt flashed across her face. Her lips curled, and she spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Damien, what are you doing here? You're nothing but a useless failure in this family. Your presence only tarnishes Franklin's reputation." Her words sliced into my heart. I clenched my jaw, swallowed hard, and said nothing. This was my father's funeral, not the place for a fight. But inside, rage flared. Who did she think she was? The woman who had entered our lives just 6 months after my mother disappeared, now standing there like a queen? Then Julian appeared, my younger stepbrother, Melanie's biological son. Spoiled and arrogant since childhood, always flaunting sports cars and all-night parties, he stood beside his mother with arms crossed, smirking. He spoke loudly on purpose. "What are you doing here, Damien? You're just a loser. You don't belong at Dad's funeral. He never really considered you his son." His words echoed through the hushed room. Several guests turned to look. Blood rushed to my face, my fists clenched. Julian, the brat my father had always indulged, was now gloating over my pain. I swallowed my anger, turned away, refusing to make a scene. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The funeral ended to the sound of mournful music, and I left with a heavy heart, not a single sincere condolence offered to me. 1 week later, the reading of the will took place at the law firm's office, a gleaming glass tower in the city center. I drove there with my heart pounding, clinging to a faint hope that my father might have left me something, even just a note. But when I entered the conference room, Melanie and Julian were already seated, wearing triumphant expressions. They looked at me like I was an intruder who shouldn't be there. Melanie gave a fake smile. Julian smirked and whispered something to her. The lawyer, an elderly man with silver hair and thick glasses, opened the will envelope and read in a flat, businesslike tone, "The entire estate, valued at approximately $1.3 billion, including the controlling shares in Hartman Global Holdings, real estate holdings from New York to London, the super yacht Hartman Pride, a collection of rare supercars and antiques, and various investment accounts, will go to Mrs. Melanie Hartman and Mr. Julian Hartman." He paused, glanced at me over his glasses, and continued, "Mr. Damien Hartman will receive a few personal items, his grandfather's watch and some books from the private library." The room fell dead silent. I sat there, ears ringing as if someone had slapped me across the face. $1.3 billion? Everything to them? And I, the eldest son, only a few old trinkets? Melanie smiled thinly and said, "Franklin gave you exactly what you deserve, Damien. You were never worthy of this family." Julian chimed in, voice dripping with glee. "You never belonged in the Hartman family. Dad knew it, so he cut you out like the weak rival you are." His laughter rang out sharp as a blade, the pain of realizing my father had never valued me mixed with the humiliation of their words. My heart felt crushed. "Dad, why did you treat me like this?" I stood up silently and walked out, their mocking laughter echoing behind me. Outside, I wandered the streets aimlessly, not knowing where to go. The rain fell harder, soaking through my suit, but I didn't care. I walked for hours through crowded avenues, past empty parks, trying to process the pain. My father had chosen them, not me. Who was I in this family? An outsider? When I returned to the estate that night, it was pitch black. But the sight before me stopped me dead. My belongings were being thrown onto the front steps, suitcases ripped open, clothes scattered across the wet ground, documents crumpled and soaked. The household staff, faces I had known since childhood, worked with heads bowed and trembling hands. Melanie stood on the top step, eyes cold, pointing at me. "Get out, Damien. This house has no place for an outsider like you anymore." Julian stood beside her, smirking, directing the staff. "Throw the rest of his junk out. Let him see exactly where he belongs." The last items, books, old photos, were tossed away like trash. The servants wouldn't meet my eyes. They were all terrified of Melanie. Their avoidance made me feel as though the entire estate had publicly disowned me. I stood there in the pouring rain, heart aching. This was my home, where I had grown up, now turned into hell. I walked away in a daze, hastily gathering a few important items, and rented a dingy motel room on the outskirts of town, a cramped space with moldy walls and the stale smell of old cigarettes. For the first time in my life, I had nowhere to call home. I lay on the hard bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, tears rolling down my face. Lost my father, lost my inheritance, lost my home. Everything had happened so fast, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. 3 days later, I tried to return to work at Hartman Global Holdings as if nothing had changed. But the moment I stepped into the office, every gaze felt different. Colleagues looked up, not with greetings, but with suspicion and wariness. Before I could even sit down, the secretary called me into a small meeting room. She placed a termination letter in front of me, voice low and shaking. "No reason given, but you understand, Damien." I understood all too well. Melanie and Julian now held the reins, and their first move was to erase me completely from the company I had poured my youth into. As I packed my desk, whispers drifted from the cubicles. I heard he was kicked out of the house. With a family that powerful, who would dare defend him? The looks directed at me were full of pity, but also fear, as if I were a publicly exiled Hartman no one wanted to be associated with. I left the building carrying only a small cardboard box, some personal files, an old photo frame, and the last scraps of my dignity. Each step down the long hallway felt like 10 years of dedication being erased in the blink of an eye. Outside in the cold wind, I stood still, my heart heavy as stone. I had lost my father, my home, my career, and my place in the very family that bore my name. Now all that remained was myself and a nameless pain. Back in the cramped motel room on the outskirts of the city, I collapsed onto the stiff bed. The dim yellow light from the dangling ceiling bulb only deepened the heaviness pressing down on me. Blurred memories from the past flooded in, sharp and painful, as if they were trying to remind me that nothing had happened by chance. I clearly remember that year when I was only 12. It was a stifling summer afternoon. My father called me into his study, one of the rare times he ever spoke to me directly. "Your mother has disappeared in a mountaineering accident," he said flatly, his voice as emotionless as if he were reading a business report. No tears, no comfort, no large-scale search, no public funeral. Just a brief announcement that my mother was dead, and that was the end of it. I cried all night, clutching the teddy bear she had given me, wondering why she had left me. She had been the only light in this cold house, the one who hugged me, told me fairy tales, and whispered that I was her pride. Now she was gone, and my world went dark. 6 months later, while I still hadn't fully grasped the pain of losing her, my father hastily married Melanie. She swept into the house like a storm, with a fake smile and calculating eyes. The already frigid home became suffocating the moment this stranger took absolute control. Melanie changed everything. My mother's belongings were cleared out, the bedroom was redecorated extravagantly with all new furniture, and my father began calling Melanie my darling wife. I stood in the hallway watching it all, my heart breaking. Why so fast? Why didn't he give me time to grieve? After marrying Melanie, my father treated me like a burden. He grew even more distant, avoided conversation, and looked at me with eyes that made a 12-year-old boy feel invisible in his own family. Before, though cold, he had at least occasionally asked about my studies. Now he barely nodded before turning to smile and talk with Melanie. I remember running into his study once, holding a drawing of my mother, asking, "Dad, will Mom come back?" He looked at me with icy eyes. "Don't mention her again. Your mother is dead." And that was it. I learned to shrink into myself, becoming a ghost wandering the vast house. Melanie was worse. She entered as the new mistress and treated me like an obstacle. She constantly mocked and belittled me. "Damien, why are you so lazy? Julian does so much better than you at school." Or, "You're just in my way." She used her contemptuous gaze to make me feel perpetually unwanted. Every morning she inspected my room, shaking her head. "Why is your room so messy? You're nothing like a young aristocrat." I tried to clean, tried to excel in school, but it was never enough. She was like a venomous snake, quietly injecting poison into my life drop by drop. Then there was Julian, Melanie's son, 2 years younger than me. Spoiled and arrogant from the start, a miniature version of his mother. He broke my toys, smashed the model car my mother had given me, and then ran crying to our father, blaming me. My father always took his side. "Damien, you're older. Let your brother have it." Julian hid my textbooks before exams and smirked when I got bad grades. Every family meal was torture. I sat at the far end of the table watching my father talk and dote on Melanie and Julian. They laughed and chatted like a real happy family. And I sat there invisible. As an adult, I tried to prove myself by joining Hartman Global Holdings. I thought if I worked hard, my father would finally acknowledge me as part of the family. I started at the bottom, hoping to climb. I was an assistant in minor departments, photocopying documents, making coffee, running errands. I was a pawn on the chessboard, constantly shuffled between roles so I could never build stable achievements. Despite my qualifications, top-tier degree, creative ideas, every proposal I submitted was blocked by Melanie. As vice chair, she held real power. My father never read anything. He just signed whatever she and Julian recommended. I once proposed a new market expansion strategy that colleagues praised. Melanie sneered. Too immature. You have no experience, Damien. Let Julian handle it. And just like that, Julian took the idea, claimed the credit, and got promoted. For years, I worked silently as a redundant employee, contributing without recognition, treated like an outsider in the very company that bore my family name. I stayed up all night finishing reports only to see Julian's name on them. I endured it, believing one day my father would see. But he never did. The bitter memories pulled me back to the present. I sat up in the motel room, wiping away tears. I realized I couldn't collapse just because I'd been thrown out of the family. I had to keep living no matter how. In the days that followed, I walked the city looking for work. I knocked on doors of companies large and small with my resume. But everyone turned me away the moment they learned I had been fired from Hartman Global Holdings. Rumors spread fast. The eldest son was kicked out of the house. There must be something wrong with him. Every door slammed shut, as if I were cursed by my old family. Refusing to give up, I took manual jobs. Loading trucks at warehouses, kitchen help at fast food joints, car washing at garages, night shifts at convenience stores. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I gritted my teeth and kept going. Each night I returned exhausted, ate instant noodles, and lay thinking. No matter how tired, one question burned inside me. Why had my father been so cold to me all those years? What had made the entire family turn against me from the moment I was young? That Friday secret. Could it be connected to my mother? One day, after an exhausting shift, I decided to return to the Hartman estate to retrieve the last few keepsakes of my mother I couldn't bear to leave behind. The necklace she always wore and the notebook she wrote in. I drove my beat-up old car to the gate, heart-pounding, terrified of running into Melanie. But when I arrived, I was surprised to see a courier standing there, looking confused because no one inside was answering. He held an envelope and glanced around nervously. I approached and asked, "What's going on, sir?" The courier checked the paper in his hand and said, "I need to deliver a letter to Mr. Franklin Hartman. I've been ringing the gate, but no one answers." I froze at the name. Weeks had passed since my father's death, yet someone was still sending him mail. I told the courier I could help, though suspicion gnawed at me, and took the envelope to his bewilderment. Once he left, I opened the letter under the shade of an old tree by the gate. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside were words heavy as stone. "Mr. Franklin, you have failed to transfer the money for several weeks, unlike every previous Friday. If you do not send it immediately, I will expose the entire truth." The signature was smudged, but the threat was crystal clear. A chill ran down my spine. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. My father going to the bank every single Friday for 14 years, and clearly to send money to this person. 14 years. Exactly since my mother disappeared. Why would a powerful billionaire like Franklin Hartman secretly send money for so long? What was he hiding? And what was the truth this person threatened to reveal? I clenched the letter, heart filled with confusion and unease. Back at the motel, I slammed the door shut and dropped into the rickety wooden chair. The feeble yellow glow from the dangling ceiling bulb cast patchy shadows across the table. I spread the letter out, smoothing the creases, and read it over and over. "You have violated the agreement. No payment on schedule. I will expose everything." Each sentence peeled back another layer of a dark secret no one had ever touched. I examined the envelope closely under the light. The postmark was faint, but I recognized it immediately. A small mountain town in the west called Eldridge, a remote place I'd only heard mentioned in weather reports. The area code pointed to a sparsely populated region deep in the forest where cars rarely passed and life seemed forgotten by time. No clear return address, just a post office box. I turned the envelope over and over, searching for any clue. There was nothing else, but it was enough. This was no trivial matter. Why had my father been sending money every week to this person? The sender clearly didn't know he was dead. The letter arrived weeks after the funeral, which meant they hadn't met in a very long time. Their only contact was money, delivered through envelopes just like this one. And why did this man dare to blackmail him? What secret did he hold that could make a man like Franklin Hartman bow his head? I sat there for hours, mind in turmoil. Memories of my mother flooded back, her disappearance exactly 14 years ago. Was it connected? My father's Friday ritual had begun right after that. A vague fear spread through me as if I were touching a live bomb. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The next morning I made a decision. I couldn't uncover the truth alone. I needed help. The only person I could think of was Silas Byrne, an old university friend who now worked as a private investigator. Silas was discreet, pragmatic, and tracked leads like a bloodhound. We had been in the same classes. He was always the quiet, razor-sharp one who solved every problem with cold logic. I called him, voice shaking. "Silas, I need to see you. There's something important I need your help with." We met at a small cafe on the outskirts where no one would recognize me. I handed him the letter and told him everything. My father's routine, the will, my suspicions. He read it, raised an eyebrow, and nodded. "This is no joke. I'll help you. Don't worry." Silas took the letter and left immediately, no unnecessary questions. That was his style. Act first, talk later. Just one day later, he called back. His voice over the phone was calm but cautious. I went to Eldridge, the town on the postmark. I went to the post office, pretended to be a security inspector, and asked to see the surveillance footage from the day it was mailed. The camera clearly shows a weathered man, about 50, wearing a hooded cap that hides his face. The way he moves, something feels off. He paused, then lowered his voice. He drove an old mud-caked pickup truck like he'd just come out of the deep woods. The license plate was dirty, but I got a photo. "That's the guy who sent your letter. He's definitely not city folk." I listened, heart racing. Picturing this grim, mysterious man sent a shiver down my spine. Silas sent the security cam photos via text. I zoomed in, a wrinkled face, deep-set eyes, the look of someone living outside the law. 3 days later, Silas finished tracing the truck's route. He called me to his cluttered little office on the edge of town, maps plastered on the walls, an old computer humming noisily. Pointing at the screen, he said, "I tracked the plate through traffic cameras around the town. The truck heads west, deliberately avoiding main roads." He continued, "I followed the route myself. Took half a day, but I found a wooden cabin deep in the forest. It's the only one showing signs of life. Smoke from the chimney, footprints, completely isolated from the town. The truck's path matches perfectly. No paved road in, just a narrow dirt track." I stared at the map spread across the table, my chest tightening. That forest was vast and ominous. News reports had mentioned unsolved disappearances there for years. Without wasting another second, I drove myself to the western forest region. The highway gradually turned into rough dirt roads, trees closing in thicker on both sides. I drove slowly, heart pounding, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. A few hundred meters from the cabin, following Silas's directions, I pulled over, hid the car behind bushes, and covered the tires with dry branches to avoid detection. I turned off the engine and listened, only the wind whistling through leaves and distant bird calls. The deep forest air felt heavy, as if it were watching me. I crept along the narrow path on foot, every step crunching on dry leaves. My heart thumped with each stride, breath coming fast. The dense canopy blocked the sunlight. The space felt cold and suffocating. Branches scratched my face. Thorns tore at my sleeves, but I didn't stop. As I drew closer, the wooden cabin emerged faintly from the gloom. A dilapidated shack, broken windows, thin smoke curling from the chimney. I held my breath, crouched behind bushes, and watched. I didn't dare rush in. I hid behind a large tree, its rough bark shielding me, and observed for hours. Time dragged like torture. The forest grew darker, shadows spreading like spilled ink. Then movement. The door opened, and a man stepped out, the same weathered, hooded figure from the post office camera. He climbed into the muddy pickup, started the engine, and drove toward town. The sound faded, leaving only dead silence. Once the truck was completely gone, I silently approached the cabin. My heart pounded like war drums, hands and feet ice cold. I stood at the back door, ear pressed against the rotting wood, listening. Suddenly, strange sounds, the clank of metal, the heavy drag of chains, and faint, pained moaning from inside, the sound of someone suffering, pleading. My whole body tensed, sweat pouring out. What was this? Who was in there? I moved slowly to a small window, stepping lightly like a cat. Through the gaps in the decayed wood, I peered in. The room was pitch black except for the weak flicker of an oil lamp. And then I saw it. A person chained with thick iron links, wrists and ankles locked to the wall, long tangled hair covering most of their face. Emaciated body, ragged clothes. The darkness made it hard to tell if it was a man or a woman, but those moans. The sound of someone who had endured too long. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat. A prisoner? Held captive? The urge to burst in and save them flashed and died just as quickly. I was alone, unarmed, with no tools to break those massive chains. If I charged in and the man returned, the consequences were unthinkable. I could die and this secret would be buried forever. I clenched my teeth, hands shaking as I pulled out my phone, switched it to silent and took several photos. The moldy room, the curled-up chained figure, every detail that could serve as evidence. Rusted iron chains, filthy floor, that shadowy form. As soon as the last photo was saved, I slipped away from the cabin and melted back into the forest before the man could return. My feet ran, yet I tried to stay silent, heart racing, breath choking. Branches whipped my face painfully, but I didn't care. I reached the car, started the engine, and sped off, mind reeling. That image haunted me. The chained person, the weak moans. This was no ordinary blackmail. This was a crime. And my father was involved? One thing was certain. What I had just seen was not merely my father's secret. It was the door to the most horrifying truth of the Hartman family. I had to come back. I had to save that person. But first, I needed a plan. Behind me, the deep forest seemed to whisper, "The truth is waiting, and it will devour everything." I drove back to the motel late at night, my mind spinning like it had been caught in a whirlwind. I lay on the bed with my eyes wide open, barely able to sleep. The image of the chained person made me realize I couldn't let another day pass. Every second that went by was another second that person suffered. I tossed and turned, sweat pouring out despite the cold, thoughts racing. If my father had been sending money to hide this, was he an accomplice? Or was he being forced? No, my father wasn't the type to be coerced. He controlled everything. So, what had he done? The next morning, with a weak sun rising through gray clouds, I got up early, eyes ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep. I called Silas immediately, my voice hoarse. "Silas, we need to meet." I saw something horrific in that cabin. We met at the same quiet cafe on the outskirts where Silas had first heard about the letter. He was already there, sitting in a shadowed corner with a black coffee, his face as serious as ever. I sat down, slid my phone across the table, and opened the photos from the night before. I whispered, "Silas, this is the person chained inside the cabin." Silas looked through the pictures, raised an eyebrow, then leaned back. "Damien, are you sure? This is a serious crime. We should call the police right now." I nodded, heart pounding. "That's what I thought too. We have photos, the letter, the location. The police will handle it." But Silas shook his head, voice low. "Hold on. The evidence we have isn't solid enough yet. The photos are blurry, the face isn't clear, and the letter is only a blackmail threat. No direct link to captivity. The police will hesitate, launch a formal investigation, send people to verify. That could take days, even weeks. And if we tip our hand too early, the guy will know. He could run, or worse, kill the victim to silence them forever." His words hit me like ice water. I gripped my coffee cup tightly, helplessness surging. "Then what do? We can't just leave them there." Silas looked at me, eyes sharp. I know. But if we report it now, we lose our chance. In the end, we reached the only possible conclusion. We had to break in ourselves and get definitive proof. We need stronger evidence, Silas said. Rescue the victim, take clear photos, record audio if we can. Then we call the police once everything is safe. I swallowed hard, fear mixing with resolve. This was dangerous. It could cost us our lives. But the image of the chained person wouldn't let me back down. We left the cafe and began planning. For 3 straight days, we took turns surveilling the cabin from a distance. I hid in bushes about 500 meters away, using the binoculars Silas gave me, noting the man's routine. Early morning, he went out for firewood. Noon, he stayed inside. Afternoon, he drove to town for supplies, usually gone for 3 hours. Silas took the night shifts and reported, "He sleeps early, but the doors have double locks." Those days were nerve-wracking. I lay prone in the forest, mosquitoes biting, drizzle dripping through the leaves, but I didn't dare move. Every time the man stepped outside, my heart clenched. He looked harsh, walked heavily like someone used to isolation. I kept wondering, who is he? Why was my father paying him? 3 slow days passed, but we had his schedule down perfectly. Wednesday afternoon, he left at 2 p.m. and returned around 5 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, under a sky heavy with dark clouds, we made our move. The moment his truck rumbled away and disappeared, we knew we had exactly 3 hours. My heart pounded like a drum, sweat soaking my black jacket. We approached the cabin from the rear, stepping lightly over dry leaves. Silas picked the back door lock with professional tools. The faint click echoed in the forest silence. We stepped into the dark, foul-smelling space, damp earth, rotting food, and a faint metallic tang like old blood. The cabin was cramped and cluttered. A rotting wooden table, a cold fireplace, and the dark corner where the moaning came from. In that narrow, shadowy corner, we saw her clearly. A woman chained with thick iron links, arms and legs covered in old scars, body emaciated to skin and bones, breathing shallow and weak. She lay curled on the cold floor, eyes closed, long matted hair hiding her face. I quickly took photos for evidence, close-ups of the chains, the wounds, the entire room, my hands trembling with emotion. Then I moved closer, knelt down, and gently brushed the hair from her face. When she slowly lifted her head, eyes cloudy and unfocused, I froze. Sunken cheeks, deep wrinkles, and a familiar scar on her neck. The burn mark from childhood she had once told me about. It was my mother, Elowyn Hartman, the woman the entire world believed had died 14 years ago. My voice broke into a whisper. "Mom." Tears fell onto her hand. She was alive, but imprisoned, starved, and mentally tortured for all those years. There was no time to collapse. Silas whispered urgently behind me, "Hurry. He could come back any second." He used bolt cutters on the chains. The sharp metallic snap rang out in the silent room. I caught my mother in my arms, her body light as if only skin remained, ice cold and frail. She moaned faintly, eyes half open but not recognizing me. We wrapped her in the blanket Silas had brought, carried her carefully to the car, avoiding any jolts. My heart raced wildly as we fled the forest, Silas driving fast over the rough terrain. On the way, we gave first aid, cleaned wounds with saline, gave her sips of sugar water from the kit. She breathed in gasps, body trembling, but she was still alive. We took her straight to the nearest suburban hospital, avoiding the city center to stay discreet. The doctors rushed her in, started IVs, cleaned wounds, ran full checks. The doctor spoke gravely. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, long-term nutrient deficiency, signs of infection. She's in a semi-comatose state, consciousness fragmented after years of captivity." I nodded without giving details, only saying we found her in the forest. They wheeled her into intensive care, hooked her to machines, and we waited in the hallway. Sitting under the cold fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor, I was overwhelmed and choking with tears. My eyes never left the ICU door. Tears streamed uncontrollably. My mother was alive, After 14 years, she was here, but in this condition. My father, had he been paying to keep her hidden? Or was he the mastermind? The thought cut like a knife. Silas put a hand on my shoulder. You okay? We did the right thing. I nodded, but inside a storm raged. From that moment, I decided to keep everything secret for now, no police yet. I would wait for my mother to wake up and ask her what really happened over those 2 decades. The disappearance, my father, Melanie, everything. And I would prepare to face the darkest truth my father had left behind. The deep forest, the letter, the wooden cabin, all of it had led to this moment. My life had changed forever, and the shadow of the Hartman family now enveloped me completely. I sat in the hospital corridor all that night, my back pressed against the cold concrete wall, eyes fixed on the ICU door. The steady beep-beep of machines echoed from inside like my mother's fragile heartbeat struggling to hold on to life. Doctors and nurses hurried in and out, faces grave beneath their white masks. Finally, a middle-aged doctor with thinning silver hair stepped out, wiping sweat from his brow. She's temporarily stable. We managed to resuscitate her in time and moved her to the intensive care unit. But her condition is extremely serious: severe emaciation, long-term malnutrition, a body worn down by years of deprivation. There's also memory disruption from prolonged trauma, possibly from head injury or extreme psychological stress. I listened, my heart twisting. My mother, the strong woman who had once been my rock, now lay there like a ghost. Will she wake up? I asked, voice trembling. The doctor sighed. We'll do everything we can, but it will take time. You should rest. I shook my head. Rest? How could I when everything around me was collapsing? The first days in the hospital passed like a prolonged nightmare. For the first 2 weeks, my mother only opened her eyes for fleeting moments, her cloudy gaze recognizing no one, her reactions as weak as a newborn's. She lay motionless on the hospital bed, skin deathly pale beneath the white sheets, IV lines piercing her arms. I stayed by her bedside from morning till night, leaving only for a few minutes to grab a stale sandwich from the vending machine. I held her hand and whispered, "Mom, it's me, Damien. Please wake up." But there was no answer, only the faint rasp of her breathing. Every tiny movement she made sent my heart leaping with hope, only for it to sink again when I realized it was just a reflex. Silas visited a few times, bringing coffee and urging me to rest, but I ignored him. I watched my mother slowly come back to life bit by bit, wounds cleaned and bandaged, skin gaining a faint pink from the IV fluids. Yet the pain inside me only grew deeper. Why? Why did she have to suffer like this? And my father? Did he know everything? The thought cut like a knife. I couldn't sleep, just sat there, mind spinning with memories. By the 3rd week, better signs appeared. My mother began recalling scattered fragments, murmuring in her sleep. The forest, the wooden cabin. Her voice trembled, face contorted in panic, eyes wide with fear. I sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly, trying to pull her out of the nightmare. The doctor explained, "Psychological trauma. She'll need time to recover." I nodded, but unease gnawed at me. Those fragments were pieces of the horrifying cabin I had broken into. How long had she lived there? And why? I waited patiently, bringing fresh flowers to her room every day, hoping the scent might awaken something. But fear still lingered. What if she never remembered everything? I would be lost in the darkness forever. One morning, I decided to try something risky. I brought an old family photo from when I was 10, standing between my parents in the mansion garden, all of us smiling brightly. The picture was faded, edges yellowed, but it was the most beautiful memory I still had. I showed it to her, voice gentle. "Mom, look. This is our family back then." She took the photo, staring at it with clouded eyes. Then suddenly she cried out as if stabbed, flung the picture away, clutched her head, and writhed on the bed in agony. Her screams echoed down the hall. Nurses rushed in and sedated her. I stood frozen, hands shaking as I picked up the photo. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to," I whispered, tears streaming. That photo had triggered something horrific inside her. I blamed myself, yet a spark of hope flickered. She was remembering, even if it hurt. In the days that followed, she stabilized, but I no longer dared to ask questions. I just sat beside her, telling her trivial stories about my life. Manual labor jobs, the tiny motel room, trying to make her smile. She listened, sometimes nodding weakly, though her eyes remained distant. Then one quiet afternoon, golden sunlight streaming through the hospital window and bringing a rare warmth, my mother lay with her eyes wider than usual. Suddenly she grabbed my hand, her thin fingers squeezing so hard it hurt. Her gaze shifted from hazy to sharp, brimming with tears. "Damien, my son. Oh God, my son," she whispered, voice trembling but clear. My heart pounded, tears burst out. "Mom, you recognize me?" She nodded, tears rolling down her gaunt cheeks. You saved me. I remember everything now. Thank God he led you to me." She squeezed my hand harder, voice breaking. "I'm so happy, Damien. You've grown up, mature, strong. I thought I'd never see you again." I leaned down and hugged her gently, afraid of hurting her. The mix of hospital smell and the familiar scent of her skin from my childhood made me sob. "Mom, I'm here. I'll never let you go again." We held each other for a long time, cries mingling with laughter in the room. It was the moment I had waited 14 years for. My mother was truly back. Then she began to speak slowly but firmly, as if tearing open the past. "That year, when you were 12, I discovered your father, Franklin, was having an affair with Melanie. She was his secretary, young, ambitious. I confronted him and demanded an immediate divorce. Not only that, I told him I would withdraw the $200 million I had invested in Hartman Global Holdings. Money I inherited from my father, from my family. It was the capital that had fueled the company's growth." She paused, breathing heavily, eyes distant. I listened, heart constricting. 200 million? That was the foundation of the Hartman empire. My father had always boasted about it, but it turned out to be my mother's money. She continued, voice shaking. Franklin panicked. He was terrified of losing that fortune, terrified the company would collapse. He apologized, begged me to forgive him, and suggested a mountain-climbing trip to mend our marriage. I believed him. I thought I could save our family for your sake. We went to the western mountains, to those towering cliffs. She stopped, tears falling. I squeezed her hand. "Keep going, Mom. I can handle it." She nodded, voice softer. "Standing on the edge of the cliff, wind howling in my ears, Franklin. He pushed me. I fell, hit the rocks, then plunged into the freezing lake below. I passed out, thinking I was dead. I froze, blood turning to ice. My father pushed her. Attempted murder? I pictured the scene. The precarious ledge, the roaring wind, and my father's hands shoving hard. "Mom, he really did that?" I whispered, voice breaking. She nodded, eyes full of pain. "Yes, but I didn't die. A man who lived isolated in the forest, later I learned his name was Gideon, pulled me from the water and saved my life. He bandaged my wounds, gave me water. When I woke up in that dark, damp cabin, I was terrified and begged him to help. Take me down the mountain, call the police, tell my son I'm alive." She paused again, gasping as if the memory were draining her. I stroked her hand, my own tears falling onto it. "But you were chained. What happened next?" She continued. His eyes changed instantly, from pity to greed. He said he had heard the news of my disappearance on the radio and knew I was the wealthy wife of the Hartman family. While I was unconscious, he had sneaked down the mountain and met Franklin. Your father offered him $5,000 a week on one condition: keep me locked up here for life so I would never reappear. Never let me speak to anyone. Never let me escape. Her words struck me like lightning. My father hadn't just tried to kill her. He had paid Gideon to imprison her for 14 years. $5,000 every Friday, that was the reason for his secret ritual. I gripped her hand, blood rushing to my head. Dad, did it to hide everything? To keep the money? She nodded weakly. From that day on, I was chained in the cabin, living in darkness, hunger, and cold, given only Gideon's scraps. I lost all sense of time and reality. Days and nights blurred, memories faded. I called your name every night, hoping one day you would come. But 14 years. I thought I was slowly dying in there. Her tears fell hot onto my hand, burning with pain. I held her tighter. Mother and son clung to each other, sobbing, overjoyed at being reunited after so long, yet devastated by the cruel truth finally revealed. I cried like a child, shoulders shaking. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought you were dead. She stroked my hair. It's not your fault. Your father. He chose money over everything. We held each other for a long time, our cries blending with the beeping machines. In that moment, pain and joy intertwined like a storm, sweeping everything away. But once I calmed down, I understood this wasn't just an affair or a broken marriage. It was attempted murder, long-term imprisonment, blackmail, a chain of crimes spanning 14 years, with my father at the center. Did Melanie and Julian know? Were they complicit in my father's crimes? I wiped my tears and looked at my mother. I'll uncover everything, Mom. I'll bring it all to light. She nodded, eyes full of trust. You're strong, Damien. But be careful. They're dangerous. I nodded, heart filled with resolve. The Hartman family secret was no longer just darkness. It was hell, and I would drag it into the light no matter the cost. The next morning I called Silas, my voice urgent. Silas, we need to meet. This is huge. We met at our usual quiet cafe, tucked away in a corner where no one would notice us. I told him everything my mother had revealed. The affair, the demand for divorce, the attempt to push her off the cliff, and the deal with Gideon. Silas listened without changing expression, but his eyes darkened. Damien, this is major crime. We need solid evidence to bring them down. I nodded, gripping my coffee cup tightly. I know, but I suspect Melanie and Julian are involved. They can't be innocent. Follow them secretly, Silas. Find out if they had anything to do with the attempt on my mother all those years ago. Silas nodded, no extra questions. Got it. I'll do it. But keep this quiet and don't do anything rash. He left and I sat there, heart full of unease. Trailing powerful people like Melanie and Julian wasn't easy. They had bodyguards and money to cover their tracks. But Silas was a professional. I trusted him. The waiting days dragged on like torture. I still stayed by my mother's side in the hospital, but my mind was always on the investigation. She was slowly recovering. She could eat thin porridge now, talk more, but she was still weak. I told her about my life, avoiding painful memories. She held my hand. You've suffered so much. I'm sorry. I shook my head. It's not your fault. I'll get justice. But inside, rage burned. My father was dead, yet Melanie and Julian were still living luxuriously on blood money. I couldn't let that stand. A few days later, Silas called, voice low as if afraid someone might overhear. Damien, meet me now. This is explosive. We met in a deserted park beneath ancient trees shedding golden leaves. Silas showed me long-range photos. The same weathered, hooded man standing at the Hartman estate gate. This is the man from the forest. His name is Gideon, Silas said gravely. He showed up at the mansion gate 2 days ago, went inside for almost half an hour, then slipped away quietly. I stared at the photos, blood turning cold. Gideon, the man who had imprisoned my mother for 14 years, had gone to the Hartman house? What was he doing there? Looking for my father? I asked, hands shaking. Silas shook his head. I couldn't hear the conversation, but he entered through the back, avoiding the main cameras. There's only one explanation. Melanie and Julian have known everything all along. From Franklin's attempt to murder Elowyn, to the fact that she was still alive, to her 14-year captivity. They've been fully aware of the entire dark secret. They probably kept paying him after your father died to buy his silence. I was stunned, collapsing onto a stone bench, mind reeling. The pain felt like a knife to the chest. For 14 years, I had lived with the people who plotted to kill my mother. Melanie with her fake smiles and taunts. Julian with his arrogance and mockery. They knew. They knew she was alive, chained in that cabin, and still let me suffer believing she was dead. I clenched my fists so hard my nails drew blood. How could they? They're monsters. Silas put a hand on my shoulder. Stay calm. We have the advantage. They don't know you rescued Elowin, but now they might be suspicious because Gideon showed up, probably demanding money. I nodded, rage cooling into icy resolve. Keep following them, Silas. All three, Melanie, Julian, and Gideon. I need to know what they're planning next. Silas nodded, and the surveillance continued. Those days I lived in hell. By day at my mother's side, smiling to reassure her. By night, haunted by the dark conspiracy. I imagined Gideon inside the mansion, sitting with Melanie and Julian, plotting how to keep it buried. Were they laughing triumphantly? Talking about me as the unwanted spare? Pain and fury mixed until I could barely eat, surviving only on black coffee to stay alert. Awake. My mother noticed the change. What's wrong? You look exhausted. I forced a smile. I'm fine, Mom. Just worried about you. But she knew. She stroked my hand. Don't do anything reckless, Damien. I don't want to lose you. Her words were a warning, but I couldn't stop. The truth had to come out. One day, Silas called urgently. Damien, get to my office now. You have to hear this. I rushed over, heart pounding. He opened his laptop and played an audio file. I followed Julian. He secretly met a group of mobsters in an empty parking lot on the outskirts. I hid nearby and recorded with long-range gear. Listen. The recording was crackly but clear. Julian's arrogant voice. I'm paying you to take care of Elowin in the hospital. She's still alive, lying there. And get rid of Gideon too. He knows too much. Clean up every loose end before everything blows up. Rough laughter from the mobsters. Relax, young master. With this money, we'll make it spotless. I listened, trembling with rage. Blood rushed to my head, fists white-knuckled. Julian, the stepbrother I had once tried to tolerate, was hiring hitmen to kill my mother, and Gideon to silence him? One step slower and she would be gone. I stood up, ready to storm the Hartman estate, but Silas held me back. Calm down. We have evidence now. But acting now means death. I panted, tears of fury streaming. They want to kill her. Again. Silas nodded. I know, but we have to be smart. First, find Gideon before Julian's people do. He's hiding in an abandoned building on the outskirts. I tracked him after he left the mansion. We made a plan fast. That night, under pouring rain, we drove to the derelict industrial zone. Cracked concrete walls, weeds growing wild. Rain drummed on the car roof, masking our sounds. Silas pointed. He's in that building, second floor. We approached carefully, avoiding flickering streetlights. The entrance door was rotted. We pushed it gently and stepped into the dark, reeking space of mold and garbage. Up the stairs, our footsteps echoed. Gideon was there, sitting by a small fire, his weathered face lit by the weak flames. At first, he reacted violently, jumping up and grabbing a rusty iron bar. Who the hell are you? Get out! I don't know anything. His voice was hoarse, full of fear. I stepped forward, hands raised. I'm Damien Hartman, Elowin's son. I know everything. You kept her prisoner for 14 years for my father's money. Gideon went pale, the bar clattering to the floor. You saved her? I didn't want to, but the money... He cursed and told us to leave, but Silas blocked the door. Hold on. Hear us out. I spoke bluntly. Melanie and Julian have hired men to kill you. They know you went to the mansion demanding money, and now they want you gone to keep you quiet. If you don't testify, you'll be the first to die. The mob is hunting you. I played Julian's recording. His voice filled the dark room. Get rid of Gideon too. He knows too much. Gideon listened, face ashen, then slumped to the floor. They want me dead? After all these years? I nodded. Exactly. But if you go to court and testify about the deal with Franklin, how you kept her imprisoned, you'll be protected. You'll have a chance to live like a normal person again, not hiding like a rat." Gideon hesitated for a long time, eyes darting, torn between fear and the will to survive. He paced the room, muttering curses, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming like an urgent warning. Finally, he stopped, gritted his teeth, and said, "Fine. I'm in. I'll testify to everything. The deal with Franklin, how I kept her, all of it. But on one condition: absolute protection. I don't want to die because of those dogs." I nodded, relief mixed with tension. "Deal. We'll take you to the police tonight." We left the abandoned building under torrential rain. Gideon huddled in the back seat like a ghost, silent and trembling. Rain hammered on the car roof, masking his ragged breathing. Silas drove, eyes locked on the road, while I sat beside him, mind reeling with what was about to happen. Gideon, the man who had imprisoned my mother for 14 years, was now the key to bringing everything down. Yet he was also a pathetic, terrified creature, shaking at the thought of death. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, wrinkled face, deep-set eyes brimming with fear. "You'll be okay," I said, trying to sound calm. "The police will protect you." He nodded but said nothing, just chain-smoked, the haze filling the cramped car. That night stretched endlessly. The wet suburban streets flickered under broken streetlights, as if leading us into a war with no escape. We reached the local police station at midnight, a gray concrete building under the downpour. Silas knew a trusted officer from past cases, so we were ushered in through a side door, away from curious eyes. The station smelled of stale coffee and damp paperwork. In the interrogation room, Gideon sat beneath harsh fluorescent lights, wrists loosely cuffed to the table. The interrogating officer, a middle-aged man with a calm, deep voice, started the recording. "Mr. Gideon, tell us everything from the beginning. Why did you hold Elowen Hartman captive?" Gideon took a deep breath. His hoarse voice crackled through the speaker in the hallway. "After I pulled her from the lake, at first I took care of her. She was badly injured, unconscious. I bandaged her, fed her. But then I heard the radio. News about the missing Hartman heiress. I knew she was rich, married to a billionaire. Greed took over. I sneaked down the mountain and met Franklin Hartman. I stood outside, fists clenched, listening to every chilling word of Gideon's confession. And Franklin, my father, was named like a common criminal." Gideon continued, voice trembling yet detailed. "He panicked when he saw me. I told him I'd saved his wife, but I could keep quiet. Franklin offered $5,000 a week in exchange for keeping Elowen locked away forever and never letting her return to the outside world. He said, 'She has to disappear permanently.' I agreed. From then on, for 14 years, I received $5,000 every Friday on the dot, into an account." His words cut into my heart like a blade. So my father's Friday ritual, the thin envelope, was payment for this crime. I dug my nails into my palms until they bled, but forced myself to keep listening. This was the truth, no matter how painful. The officer pressed further. "How exactly did you keep her imprisoned?" Gideon described it matter-of-factly, as if recounting an ordinary routine, but to me each word was hell. "I locked the doors, chained her wrists and ankles with heavy iron so she couldn't escape. Starved her for days if she screamed, kept the room almost completely dark, only slivers of light through cracks. Cut off all contact, no radio, nothing. Whenever she tried to escape early on, she was strong at first, scratched and fought. I threatened to beat her or left her hungry longer. All to honor the agreement with Franklin and keep the money coming. She grew weaker, eventually just lay there, calling her son's name in despair. My heart shattered as Gideon described Elowen, my mother wasting away, starved, chained for years, crying my name in hopelessness. "Damien, my boy," he mimicked her frail, broken voice. I bit my lip until it bled, tears streaming uncontrollably. She had called for me every night in that darkness while I lived obliviously in the mansion, thinking she was dead. How could I ever forgive myself? I sat through the entire confession, body shaking. Silas emerged from the next room and handed the police the audio files and photos. Evidence of Julian's meeting with the mob, pictures of the cabin, the blackmail letter. Gideon's testimony matched perfectly with Silas's evidence and my mother's account. The officer nodded gravely. This is huge. Attempted murder, unlawful imprisonment, extortion, and now conspiracy to commit murder by hiring hitmen. We'll open a full case immediately. They questioned me briefly how I found Gideon, how I rescued my mother, then let me go. But I didn't leave. I waited in the hallway. Based on the evidence in Silas's recordings, police obtained emergency arrest warrants for Melanie and Julian on charges of orchestrating the ongoing cover-up and attempted murders. That night, special police units moved in unison. I stood outside the station under the cold drizzle, watching black police cars speed away. One team headed to the Hartman mansion to arrest Melanie and Julian. I could picture them being dragged from their luxurious beds, faces pale with shock. Another team went up the mountain to seal off the cabin and collect remaining evidence. The rusted chains bolted to the wall, rotting food scraps, the decayed cot where my mother had lain curled up, all undeniable proof. Silas stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. It's almost over, Damien. They'll be caught. I nodded, but my heart was chaos. I couldn't stay behind. An overwhelming urge drove me to follow the SWAT team to the Hartman mansion. The lead officer, a tall man with a calm, deep voice, looked at me. You sure about this? It could get chaotic. I nodded firmly. I have to see it with my own eyes. They destroyed my life. He sighed, then let me ride along, seated in the back of a tactical vehicle. At midnight, the convoy screeched to a halt in front of the Hartman estate gates. Tires screamed on the wet pavement, shattering the false tranquility of the wealthy neighborhood. Red and blue lights spun atop the vehicles, bathing the entire facade in judgment, blinding beams sweeping across ancient trees, towering iron gates, and imposing stone statues. I stepped out and stood just behind the hastily erected police cordon, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Rain soaked through my coat, chilling my skin, but all I felt was the fire of rage burning inside. This was the house I grew up in, the place Melanie and Julian had turned into my personal hell. Now justice was knocking. The SWAT team, black-clad figures with shields and sidearms, moved like a flood. They breached the gate with specialized tools. The sharp clang of metal rang out. The gates swung open and they surged forward, storming the mansion. I followed at a distance, flanked by two officers, my feet crunching on the familiar gravel path while emotions churned inside me. Rain drummed overhead, but the tension was suffocating. They smashed through the front door, wood splintering with a thunderous crack, and poured into the opulent living room. Headlamp beams from their helmets lit up the vast space. Polished marble floors, expensive leather sofas, an antique fireplace, priceless paintings on the walls. Melanie stood in the center wearing a white silk nightgown, hair disheveled, face ashen under the blinding lights. She hadn't been asleep, perhaps awakened by the sound of vehicles or some instinct. Her eyes swept over the officers, then locked on me with shock and pure hatred. "What are you doing in my house?" she shrieked, voice shrill and echoing. The lead officer read the arrest warrant in a steady, resolute tone. "Melanie Hartman, Julian Hartman. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful imprisonment, extortion, and solicitation of murder." Melanie instantly screamed like a wounded animal, pointing at me. "You traitor! You worthless trash who doesn't deserve the Hartman name! You'll regret this!" Her curses cut into me like knives, but I stood unmoved. She had once been my stepmother, had controlled my life with the same venomous contempt, but now, under the floodlights and in front of the police, she was nothing but a cornered criminal. Then Julian appeared. He came charging down the grand staircase in shorts and a t-shirt, eyes bloodshot with rage. "What the hell is this?" he roared, then spotted me and his face twisted further. He lunged straight at me, fist raised. You bastard! I'll kill you." but 3 officers tackled him instantly, wrenching his arms behind his back as he thrashed like a hooked fish. "Let me go. I'm Julian Hartman. Do you know who I am?" He screamed, spit flying. "Damien, you're dead. I swear I'll make you pay when I get out." I met his gaze, cold and unflinching. No family treats each other like this, and the truth has finally spoken. My words hung in the tense air, silencing Melanie and Julian for a moment. Julian struggled less, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Melanie, hearing more, went berserk, voice hoarse from screaming, "You little bastard! You're the one destroying this family. I'll hire the best lawyers. You'll rot in prison." She lunged at me, but officers blocked her, cuffing her wrists as she howled in fury. She thrashed, hair falling over her face, but it was useless. They dragged her down the long hallway, the domain she had ruled like a queen for years, issuing orders to staff and belittling me. Now she was hauled away like a common criminal, still shrieking, "Let me go! I've done nothing wrong." Julian was shoved out the door, still reaching for me, cursing nonstop. "Damien, you traitor. This is all your fault. I'll kill you. I swear it." He tried to shift all blame onto me. "You made this up. Dad's dead and now you want everything." The police forced Julian into the patrol car. He craned his neck to glare at me with pure hatred. I stood there watching him disappear behind the door, feeling no pity. He had once been my brother, but now he was nothing more than an accomplice in evil. The car doors slammed shut with a heavy thud. Sirens wailed, tearing through the night, carrying Melanie and Julian away from the mansion forever. The vehicles sped off into the rain, red lights flashing until they vanished behind the trees. I took a long, deep breath. The cold, wet air filled my lungs. Not triumph, but release after 14 years of darkness. The rain washed everything away, yet the pain still lingered. I drove back to the hospital through the pouring rain, my mind still echoing with Melanie's and Julian's screams. The Hartman mansion, once a symbol of power and luxury, now stood like a silent ghost in the night. I entered my mother's room. She was sleeping peacefully under the dim light. I sat beside her bed, took her hand, and whispered, "Mom, they've been arrested. I did it." She opened her eyes slightly and gave a weak smile. "My son. So strong." Tears rolled down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief. 14 years of suffering were finally beginning to dissolve. The following weeks passed in chaos. The media went wild. Hartman dynasty collapses in 14-year murder and imprisonment scandal. Photos of my mother, emaciated when rescued, appeared everywhere, alongside images of Melanie and Julian in handcuffs. I avoided the news, avoided television, and focused only on my mother. In those days, the police quickly completed the case file. Given the severity, involving a billionaire, crimes spanning over a decade, and attempted contract killings, the trial was scheduled just weeks later. I prepared mentally, met with lawyers, reviewed every detail. Silas stayed by my side, supplying additional evidence. "We have everything," he said. "They won't escape." The trial opened at the city's central courthouse, a grand old building with imposing stone columns. The courtroom was packed with journalists, media crews, financial elites, and the public. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of the Hartmans, once icons of wealth, now criminals. I walked in wearing a simple black suit, heart pounding. The seats were full. Camera flashes exploded as I took my place in the witness area. My mother was too weak to attend. Melanie and Julian were brought in wearing gray prison uniforms, wrists cuffed, faces gaunt after weeks in detention. Gideon was also present, seated separately, looking haggard. They glared at me with pure hatred, but I met their eyes without flinching. The prosecutor, a sharp-voiced middle-aged woman, read the lengthy indictment: conspiracy to murder Elowen, 14 years of unlawful imprisonment, extortion, forgery of inheritance documents, and hiring assassins to eliminate witnesses. The room buzzed, reporters scribbled furiously. She detailed: Franklin Hartman pushed his wife off a cliff to seize her assets, then paid Gideon to keep her imprisoned for 14 years. Melanie and Julian knew everything, continued the cover-up, and even hired mobsters to silence the truth when it threatened to surface. Melanie shook her head in denial. Julian stared at the floor. I sat listening to every word, heart aching. This was the truth, but hearing it publicly still felt like being cut open. The evidence Silas and I had gathered was projected for the court. Photos of the rotting forest cabin, video of my mother's condition upon rescue, her skeletal frame, chain marks on wrists and ankles, that silenced the entire room. Close-ups of the rusted iron chains bolted to the wall, rotting food scraps on the floor, the decayed cot where my mother had lain curled up, all displayed on giant screens. Then the audio of Julian paying the mobsters played clearly, his voice commanding, "Take care of Elowin and clean up Gideon." Followed by Gideon's detailed testimony, how he made the deal with my father, how he kept my mother chained and starved to ensure silence. Everything wove together into a flawless tapestry of crime with no gaps. The courtroom fell dead silent except for the frantic clicking of cameras. I watched Melanie go pale as her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Investigators reopened all records of my mother's family inheritance. The prosecutor presented. All documents Franklin and Melanie used to seize over $200 million, Elowin's inheritance from her father, were proven forgeries with no legal validity. The room erupted in whispers. She continued, "Since the original fortune belonged to Elowin and was illegally taken, the court orders the full recovery of the current assets, including all profits Franklin generated over 14 years, totaling over $1 billion and their complete restitution to Mrs. Elowin Hartman." The financial world in the room buzzed. To me, it wasn't about money, it was justice for my mother and the years she endured. Melanie completely lost control in the courtroom. She leapt to her feet, screaming denials. "It's all lies. Franklin did everything. I knew nothing. Damien, you evil bastard, you made this up to steal the fortune." Her lawyer repeatedly objected, raising his hand. "Your Honor, my client is distraught." But no evidence could be refuted. The photos, recordings, and Gideon's testimony were airtight. She pointed at me, face crimson. "You'll regret this. I'll appeal." The entire room watched her collapse from arrogant queen to a desperate criminal. Julian broke down right there in court. He sobbed like a child, shoulders shaking. I just followed Mom. I was afraid of losing my inheritance. Please, Your Honor, be lenient." His voice cracked, tears streaming down his sunken face. He confessed, "I hired the hitman because I was terrified the secret would come out. But I never wanted to kill anyone." The prosecutor coldly rebutted, "The defendant actively solicited murder. There can be no leniency." I looked at him without a shred of pity. He had mocked me at my father's funeral, thrown me out of my home. Now he was just a broken man stripped of his facade. The panel of 3 stern-faced judges returned after a short deliberation. The courtroom fell completely silent except for the rustle of papers. Melanie Hartman, 30 years imprisonment for masterminding the crimes and forging inheritance documents. She collapsed, screaming, "No! This can't be. I'm innocent." Julian Hartman, 18 years imprisonment for complicity, hiring assassins and obstruction of justice. He sobbed uncontrollably, head dropping onto the table. Gideon, 25 years imprisonment for unlawful imprisonment, extortion, and 14 years of concealing the crime. He bowed his head, expressionless. The room erupted. Camera flashes went wild. I sat there, exhaling, tears rolling down my face. Justice had been served, yet why did my heart still feel so heavy? After the trial, I was allowed a final visit to the prison to complete closing statements, a formality to confirm details. The detention center was on the outskirts, surrounded by high concrete walls, the air cold and oppressive. My meeting with Melanie took place in a stark room separated by thick glass, speaking only through a phone. She entered in a gray prisoner uniform, hair now white and disheveled, no trace of makeup. Yet she still carried her old arrogance, sitting straight-backed, glaring at me with contempt. "Come to gloat," she spat. It was all circumstances. Your grandfather left too much to Elowen. Everyone had to fight for it. Franklin did it for the company. I only helped. She blamed circumstances, my father, my grandfather, never showing a shred of remorse for my mother. I looked at her calmly, voice ice cold. You destroyed this family. You knew my mother was alive, imprisoned, and still lived in luxury. Prison is the only choice you have left. My words cut deep. She fell silent for a second, then burst into tears, not of regret, but for her lost power. I've lost everything. The mansion, the money, all of it. Tears fell, but her eyes still burned with hatred. I stood and walked away without looking back. She had once been my nightmare. Now she was just the past. The meeting with Julian was heavier. He was brought in looking utterly broken, gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, no trace of arrogance left. He sat down, voice trembling. Damien, brother, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I just followed Mom. I was scared of losing everything. Please forgive me. He cried, shoulders shaking, looking like the little boy who once broke my toys. I looked at him, feeling no hatred, only pity. I don't hate you. But what you did has to be judged by the law. Forgiveness, that will take time. He nodded, tears streaming. I know. Thank you. I left, heart filled with mixed emotions. He had once been my enemy, but he was also a victim of Melanie. Walking out of the prison into the warm afternoon sun, I felt light flood in after years of storm. The breeze carried the scent of fresh grass. The Hartman dynasty had fallen, justice was served, and I could finally move forward with my mother, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. I drove back to the hospital, heart lighter. My mother was waiting, and we would begin our new life. 14 years of pain were over, and the future lay ahead. After the trial, Hartman Global Holdings plunged into a profound crisis. I followed the news from a distance through the reports Silas still faithfully sent me. He remained in touch, a steadfast friend through everything. Shareholders voted to remove the entire old board, those who had once been loyal to my father and Melanie. The stock price crashed catastrophically, from hundreds of dollars per share to mere cents, sending shockwaves through the financial world. The brand faced class action lawsuits over ethical scandals. Partners withdrew, employees resigned en masse, and the press relentlessly covered the empire built on blood and tears. The company was forced into a complete restructuring and a name change, erasing Franklin Hartman's legacy forever. An empire that collapsed under the weight of its own crimes. I sat in my mother's hospital room reading those reports, feeling calm. That had once been the place where I worked, where I tried to prove myself, but now it was just the past. How do you feel about all this? My mother asked, her voice still weak but curious. I smiled. They deserved it, Mom. We don't need it anymore. My mother gave me full authority over the recovered assets immediately after the court's ruling. Lying in her hospital bed, she squeezed my hand tightly. You decide, son. I trust you. The enormous sum, more than $1 billion from the original Fortune Plus accumulated profits, now belonged to her, but she wanted none of it. I don't want money stained with blood, she said. I nodded and began acting. I decided to sell all the shares in the conglomerate. The meetings with lawyers dragged on, but they ultimately brought in hundreds of millions. Then I liquidated the supercars, the lavish yacht that had once been my father's pride. The Hartman mansion with its sprawling gardens and all related properties, from the New York penthouse to villas across Europe. With every sale I signed, a piece of the past dissolved. In total, I recovered about $600 million, enough for my mother and me to start a clean new life, free from the old family's shadows. I invested a portion in safe funds, the rest would build our future. I took my mother away from the city as soon as she was strong enough. After weeks of therapy, she walked more steadily, though she still needed my arm for support. We chose a quiet little house on the outskirts, 2 hours from the city, a place bathed in warm sunlight with gentle winds blowing across green fields and no trace of the Hartman darkness. A modest home with a small vegetable garden out back, A cozy living room with a fireplace and windows overlooking a sparkling lake. My mother recovered faster than expected. Eating properly, I cooked the dishes she loved, from vegetable soup to toasted bread. She gradually gained weight, her skin glowing with health again. A psychologist visited twice a week to help her face the memories. I watched her and felt nothing but gratitude. She was beginning to live the life she thought she had lost forever, walking with me, cooking together, and dreaming of the future. The scars on her wrists remained, but they were reminders of her strength. One gentle autumn afternoon, golden sunlight filtering through the trees, I took my mother to visit my grandfather's grave in a suburban cemetery. Before the stone engraved with his name, I placed the fresh flowers we had brought and stood in silence for a long time. The wind rustled the leaves, carrying the scent of damp earth. I held my mother's hand, feeling a profound lightness. From this day forward, we could live a new life, no longer ruled by fear or control, no longer carrying the Hartman name like a sentence, but as two ordinary people reborn. We walked away from the grave, the warm afternoon sun lighting our path home. A new life had begun, and I was ready. 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 I was ready.